Welcome to Michigan Reimagined, a Spotlight podcast. And here's your host, Chris Buck.
So, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation is the state's spearhead when it comes to economic development in Michigan. Here to discuss a new look on 2022 initiatives and strategies is the Executive Vice President and Chief Business Development Officer at the MEDC, Mr. Josh Hundt. Welcome back, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you back in. And, you know, if you're paying attention, anyone out there on the MEDC's LinkedIn or social media or website, you're going to see a lot of new energy, a lot of new initiatives. And I thought it was a good time as we turn the calendar into a new year to talk about what the MEDC's up to. So to give those who aren't all that familiar with the MEDC a little bit of a primer, can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a whole?
Absolutely. Yeah. So great. First of all, thank you for having me. It's always good to be here. And as we go into the new year, we're looking forward to, with optimism, to a great year and what we think can be a really positive year for Michigan in terms of how the state moves forward and how the economy can move forward. And at the MEDC, what we do is every day we're looking to build the fastest growing, most resilient, and most equitable economy that we can for Michiganders, and using that through programs and services that support communities, small businesses, and our workforce and our large corporate entities across the state to make sure that we're building a brighter future for the state.
So there's been a lot of press about mobility, electric vehicles, battery production, other automotive manufacturing in and out of state. Most notably, I think Ford's decision to expand in Tennessee and Kentucky versus here in Michigan. What's Michigan learned and kind of what's being done to make us more competitive in this type of environment?
Well, Michigan remains the home of the North American automotive industry, both in terms of research and development and in terms of manufacturing, with over 3/4 of all research and development for the automotive industry still taking place here, 25% of automotive manufacturing taking place here. Automotive and mobility remains a critical industry for us as a state. But that also, there's recognition that we still need to do more to grow the future and to be the leaders for this next century like we were for the last century. And so we have to constantly be looking at what are we doing both in terms of our business climate and in terms of the overall way we're supporting this industry in the state. One of the first things the governor did was establish the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, which was a way to establish the first in the country governor's office level chief mobility officer in the state that is driving mobility investments and critical thinking across government to make sure that we're best supporting the future of that industry. We also know that industry is taking a seismic shift away from the internal combustion engine towards electrification. And we need to win that future of electrification and the future of mobility. And in partnership with the legislature and the governor's office, just put forth a new program called the Critical Industry Program and the Michigan Site Readiness Program that will allow us to have incentives for significant projects in the mobility industry and other advanced manufacturing industries that allow us to compete for those transformational type of projects to ensure that we're securing the great types of jobs and investment that we need in the state in mobility and other key industries to help us grow.
And it's not like Ford hasn't invested in Michigan, right? I think there was a lot of chatter, at least on social media, about, Ford not being loyal to Michigan by moving kind of out of state. But I mean, they're renovating the train station down, in Corktown. And I mean, they've obviously had their headquarters here for a long, long time. Can you speak to that at all? I mean, is there a sense that, and then General Motors, I mean, not to lead you too much, but isn't General Motors also planning on an in Michigan battery manufacturing plant?
So we're constantly in communication with companies like Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, and other key corporate entities across the state. And so, first of all, Ford remains a Michigan company, remains a company with a headquarters that they're transforming in Dearborn. And as you mentioned, all the work that they're doing in the Corktown neighborhood of Detroit around the train station and other buildings, that's very exciting in terms of what they're doing there. That ties back to that 75% of research and development in the space that's happening here. They have plan to have about 2,500 Ford jobs. And then I think almost as importantly, or perhaps more importantly, their goal is to have 2,500 non-Ford jobs that are in that area as well, that it becomes a true advanced technology hub around mobility, around future technologies, to really be the first in the Midwest in terms of that type of hub. And so while Ford is going to continue to grow in Michigan and grow in other parts of the country and around the world, that growth all comes back home to a company that's headquartered here and doing great things in the state. And we have expect great things from General Motors, Stellantis, and many other companies across the state as well, and see great things happening in 2022.
That's great. So outside of automotive manufacturing, what other critical industries is Michigan trying to entice, and kind of how are we preparing? You mentioned site readiness. What is site readiness for, maybe some of our audience here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I'll hit on the question around the industries, and automotive and mobility are critically important and something that we must win that space. But we also need to recognize that Michigan has competitive advantage in other industries as well, and must continue to find ways to diversify our state's economy. And so we'll begin with advanced manufacturing, the broader manufacturing beyond automotive. How do we build off of that legacy of manufacturing strength in the state to make sure that we're growing in other areas, especially related to the onshoring and the reshoring we're seeing as supply chains are disrupted, for opportunities in the semiconductor industry, life sciences and medical devices are all areas that we have strength in manufacturing, as highlighted by the Pfizer vaccine being manufactured right here in Michigan. And in order to make sure that we're seeing this industry growth, or the growth of Michigan, happen in all 83 counties of the state, we also see important areas for us to grow in terms of agribusiness and professional services and technology more broadly are all ways for us to grow. And to hit on that question around site readiness, what we need to make sure of is that we have locations in the state where companies can grow and prosper. And that can either be in a couple of different ways. First can be identifying land that is available in the state where a company can locate a new manufacturing facility or a new headquarters, and making sure that they have the access to the utilities that they need, to the infrastructure that they need, that it's a quality site near a strong workforce. The other opportunity is to look at how can we repurpose older, former facilities to get them ready for either manufacturing or headquarters as well. Because if we have the right talent, we have the right business climate, but if we don't have a place to put these projects, you ultimately still can't land them. So at the end of the day, we must have locations to put all these great projects we expect to see come here in Michigan.
And that's a really competitive process I've learned in my dabblings with economic development, right? I mean, you can be ahead of the curve or you can be behind the curve, scrambling to put a package together for someone's needs, or you could have something that's already got a bow on it, right? I mean, talk a little bit about what the process is to get ahead of it and identify a place and know all the things that go along with that space, so it's ready to be delivered to someone when they raise their hand and say, I'm looking for a space that meets these criteria.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think overall economic development is about a long-term strategy and a cohesive plan for where do you want to go as a state or community in the long term. And I think that's why our strategy and our vision around being an equitable, resilient, and fast-growing state, that helps shape what we're thinking about every day. And then those industries that we know we want to target, that shapes a focus for where we want to go as a state. A project itself, in terms of trying to recruit or trying to grow a company in the state, those are many months to perhaps more than that in terms of getting a company to ultimately make a location decision, where you're talking about things like, what's the land availability? What's the workforce development? What's the business climate? Because many of the companies that we're trying to secure from Michigan today, they can locate anywhere in the world. And we need to make sure that we're making the case that Michigan is the best place for them to grow. And then as you look at longer term things around something like assembling land for a project, that can be a decade in the making sometimes to put land together. A few years back, Toyota and Mazda announced a plant in Alabama, and the Alabama economic developer said, we didn't win this project today when the announcement took place. We won this project 10 years ago when we began planning for this. And so while it's the location decision that makes the news, it's the work that economic development professionals, legislative leaders, municipal leaders, and the business community put in over the long term to have a cohesive strategy and a plan. That's how you win and see a state and a community grow.
And you maybe mentioned it a little bit earlier on, but that whole question about targeting other industries and having a site readiness plan and incentives and those kinds of things. What exactly was recently done by the governor? I mean, I read the article, but share with us a little bit. It had bipartisan support. Talk to me about the momentum and what exactly was determined in that at the government level.
Absolutely. So first of all, there's an excellent partnership between the legislature and the governor's office to pass and ultimately sign through bipartisan support. Two separate programs. First was a critical industry grant program that allows Michigan to have incentives that can be utilized for offsetting investment, that can be utilized for workforce training or for federal match if there's federal investment coming in, as a way to attract businesses to grow in the state. And the other component to that was a site readiness grant program that is a twofold program. First, kind of highlights those long-term planning of sites and what do we need to be ready for the next projects that come to invest in sites, to ensure the infrastructure is in place in partnership with the local communities and the private sector. And then the other part of that program is a grant program for projects that are in the pipeline today. As they're identifying a site, can we make sure that we have that land that's accessible with the infrastructure that they need in place and is ready to go for them to grow here in Michigan? And it was just a true example of bipartisan partnership across all levels of government, the business community, all recognizing that we have an opportunity here to see great things happen, and we need to make sure that we have the tools and resources to make that happen here in Michigan instead of somewhere else.
And it's just refreshing to hear the bipartisan portion of that. It seems like in such a time of, a division, to have people come together and say, this is what's important for Michigan's future, to make that big win 10 years from now, to have everyone on board with having the same plan. That's great. So, as I read and hear more about the MEDC, I've also noted a theme of just driving great customer service when working to improve the economic development in Michigan. Customer service, how important is that in what you do, and what does that exactly look like?
Yeah, customer service is central to everything that we do. And what we know is that we can make sure that we provide the best level of customer care in every single interaction that we have. You may not always win every project, and there may be other factors that are at play, but one thing that we can always control is making sure that we're providing the best level of customer service that we can. That begins with being proactive with our customers and the business community and entrepreneurs and the communities that we work with, and being proactive and asking them how we can help and how we can support them, and shaping any of the tools and support that we have, not based on just our own thinking, but based on the voice of the customer. Beyond that, we also continually are working to ensure that our processes are simpler and move faster at the speed of business. And so companies can go onto our website and find applications for our programs directly on the website and see quick turnaround times. We've shortened all of our processes to get approvals. We've moved faster in establishing programs. And so it's really a matter of making sure we're going with the speed of our customer and doing all the work that we do based on the voice of the customer. And
that's due to it being competitive, right? And places that are also being looked at have those things in place, or we want to make sure that we're ahead of those other folks. Or that sounds like a very noble direction to go.
And it's really no different than any other industry that you would be in, where you get the best customer. You can get the same product or a similar product in a lot of different places, but if you can have that commitment and understanding that, in our case, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation understands the needs of the customer and is going to work every day to serve them, that goes a long way. And that's something that we wake up and think about every day is what we can do to best serve the customer.
Right on. So I've also heard a phrase called the next 20 months is going to drive the next 20 years of economic development in Michigan. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, and so that's something our new CEO, Quentin Messer Jr., first started talking about back in July. And so we keep saying the next 20 months. We're probably down to about 15 months now. But what we we see this as a moment, as hopefully we ultimately come out of the pandemic and see the shift in terms of manufacturing coming back into this country and key industries like advanced manufacturing and semiconductor industry. We see fast-moving shifts in technology taking place where Michigan has a chance to win, and we're seeing this seismic shift within the electrification and the mobility sector of the automotive industry. This is a moment where we must win and we can win. And we truly believe that there will be some projects and opportunities and broader economic decisions that will be made to support small businesses, communities, our main streets, and those large businesses that will set Michigan up, that will look back in 20 years and know that those decisions that were made in 2022 were some of the decisions that set Michigan up for a bright future for many years to come.
And that's driving everything you do, right? I got to believe that clock is always running. But I mean, coming out of the pandemic, right, there's an opportunity to miss opportunities or to slingshot, and really come out of the pandemic really on offense, which is great. So, and everything we've talked about so far in this conversation has been really the themes of what's come out of how are we going to set ourselves up for the next 20 years over the next 20 months. But how are those targets identified? I mean, clearly the MEDC has a very intelligent staff who has their finger on the pulse of what's going on. You have the ear of the state government. Clearly they've got their goals, but how do you know you're really serving the Michigan population? What does that process look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it really goes to what we talked about in a lot of this is there does have to be thoughtful planning about what we can do to help Michiganders. And it's not going on just a deal by deal or a case by case basis. It's making sure that we set goals in place that help us grow. And so first of all, one of the things we're looking for are, can we see significant more job growth happen here in the state? And then beyond that, are those good paying jobs that allow everybody to fully participate in the economy? One threshold that we look at is the United Way's ALICE threshold, which is a different measurement of poverty or low income beyond the federal poverty level, to make sure that we're supporting projects with wages that have families able to fully participate in the growth of the economy. And that's where it gets to that equity aspect of what we're looking at doing in the state. And then the final piece is really making sure that we're seeing our support happen in all 83 counties of the state. This needs to be a resilient recovery coming out of the pandemic that doesn't just happen in certain communities or in certain sectors, but that we see every corner of the state from Menominee to Monroe continue to grow and continue to see themselves as a part of the growth of the economy. And we measure everything that we do. We track the work that we're doing to make sure that we are moving the needle. And if something needs to change, we need to make sure that we're able to adjust, which we've all had to have done. We've all adjusted a lot over the course of the last 2 years in the pandemic, and we need to continue to adjust to keep ourselves ahead of the other states and countries that we're competing with every day.
Well, it sounds like you all have a lot on your plate. It sounds like they're very noble efforts and directions that are logical to me as to what we need to do to make sure Michigan competes. Again, I think it's making sure we leverage all the natural strengths that we have and not try to become something that we aren't playing in right now and just get better at the things we do great. Can you remind the listening audience as to how they can get in touch with you or read more about LinkedIn or read more about the MEDC?
Yeah, absolutely. The best place to find us is michiganbusiness.org, where you can learn about all the different aspects of what the MEDC is doing to build a fast-growing, resilient, and equitable economy for Michiganders.
That's great. Well, I'm really pleased to have had the Executive Vice President and Chief Business Development Officer of the MEDC, Mr. Josh Hundt. Thanks for joining me again today, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me.